15 Black R&B female singers who were the worst sex addicts. 15 legendary R&B women. Yet the stories you've heard about them may be more fiction than fact. Desire, rumors, and controversy were often magnified until they overshadowed the music itself. But what was real and what was manufactured? Before we uncover the truth behind these narratives, subscribe now to Black Legends Revealed for stories that challenge everything you thought you knew. Faith Evans. Faith Evans entered R&B with a voice that sounded almost too pure for the chaos waiting around her. In the mid-1990s, she became one of Bad Boy Records' brightest female voices, singing with gospel control, velvet restraint, and the kind of emotional weight that made heartbreak feel expensive. But outside the studio, headlines began building a very different image. Her marriage to the notorious Blige. The East Coast. West Coast tension and public rumors surrounding loyalty, desire, and betrayal pulled her name into a storm she never fully controlled. What made Faith's image so complicated was not one confirmed scandal, but the way gossip culture tried to turn every relationship, every late-night rumor, and every public connection into evidence of something darker. She was linked in the public imagination to one of hip-hop's most dangerous love triangles, especially after Tupac Shakur used her name in music that fueled controversy. But how much of what fans remember was truth, and how much was a weaponized rumor? For an audience watching from the outside, Faith became more than a singer. She became a symbol of how quickly a woman's private life could be judged, exaggerated, and replayed for decades. Still, Faith Evans survived the noise with something stronger than denial. She kept singing. Albums like Faith Keep the Faith and Faithfully showed a woman trying to protect her voice while the public kept reaching for her personal wounds. Faith's name still carries shock value because her talent was undeniable, yet the rumors around her love life became almost as famous as the music itself. In the end, the most disturbing part is not what people claimed about Faith Evans. It is how eagerly the industry turned a woman's intimacy into public entertainment. K. Michelle. K. Michelle never entered R&B like an artist trying to sound polite. Her voice came with bruises in it, sharp, soulful, and unafraid to expose the kind of pain most singers smooth over. From Love and Hip Hop Atlanta to songs like VSOP and Can't Raise a Man, she built her name on emotional honesty, romantic fallout, and the messy aftermath of wanting love from people who could not protect it. She did not sell fantasy. She sang like someone reading old wounds out loud. Her public image became tied to desire, heartbreak, and confrontation because she rarely hid the cost of her choices. She spoke openly about relationships, body image, surgery, regrets, and the pressure placed on women who are expected to be beautiful, available, and silent at the same time. How many fans judged the headlines without listening to the hurt underneath the music, K? Michelle's songs often sound like late-night confessions. Not careless scandal, but a woman trying to understand why love kept arriving with damage attached. The shock around her name comes from how exposed she allowed herself to be. In an industry that often rewards mystery, K. Michelle gave audiences anger, sensuality, regret, humor, and survival without cleaning it up for comfort. Her story should not be reduced to a cruel label about addiction. The stronger angle is the public battle between desire and self-respect. For older viewers, her journey carries a familiar warning. Fame can amplify patterns people already struggle with in private. K. Michelle's most gripping moments come from that tension, a gifted R&B singer turning romantic chaos into music that feels raw enough to make listeners look at their own past. Etta James. Etta James did not sing desire like a polished studio fantasy. She made it sound bruised, hungry, dangerous, and alive. When At Last became her signature, many listeners heard romance. Beneath that velvet glow was a woman whose real life carried far more turbulence than the wedding song image suggests. Born Jamesetta Hawkins, she entered music young, sharpened by loneliness, unstable family roots, and a business that often consumed gifted women before protecting them. Her voice carried heat because she understood appetite in many forms: applause, affection, escape, and survival. Etta later spoke openly about addiction, painful relationships, and the chaos that followed her through fame. During the 1960s and 1970s, her career was repeatedly shaken by heroin use, arrests, health problems, and periods when her personal battles nearly drowned out her genius. When a woman sings with that much fire, do people hear her pain, or only the scandal they want to imagine? Her sensual stage presence made audiences believe every lyric had been lived, but the truth was heavier than gossip. Etta James belongs near this title only through the dangerous public mythology built around women who sang openly about longing, lust, and need. Songs like "I Just Want to Make Love to You" helped shape her image as fearless and provocative, yet reducing her to a crude label would miss the deeper wound. Her worst battles were not simply about desire. They were about a life spent fighting hunger for love, numbness, control, and recognition. By the time she won Grammys, entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and became an influence on generations of singers, Etta had already paid for every note with experience. What still shocks viewers is not just her wild reputation. It is the contrast between that elegant voice and the storm behind it. Etta James did not merely perform passion. She dragged it from the darkest rooms of her life and turned it into music people still play when they want to feel something real. Keyshia Cole. Keyshia Cole built her R&B legacy on love that did not arrive clean. Her voice always sounded like it had walked through arguments, locked doors, apologies, and late-night calls that should have gone unanswered. When she released The Way It Is, songs like "Love, I Should Have Cheated" and "I Remember" turned romantic damage into confession. She was not singing from a fantasy bedroom. She sounded like a woman standing in the wreckage, still trying to decide whether heartbreak was proof of passion or a warning sign. Her public life made that image even more intense. Through reality television interviews and deeply emotional performances, fans watched a woman whose music often circled desire, betrayal, loyalty, and the hunger to be chosen. That does not mean she should be branded with a cruel label about addiction. The more shocking truth is how openly her art exposed the dangerous pull of toxic love, the kind that can feel impossible to quit, even when it keeps breaking you. How many listeners have replayed her songs because they recognized that same weakness in themselves? Keyshia's name grips the audience because her catalog sounds like a diary of emotional dependency, wanting love, doubting love, fighting for love, and grieving what love did to her. For viewers between 45 and 65, that theme lands hard because they understand that desire is not always glamorous. Sometimes it becomes a pattern. Sometimes it makes people return to someone who already caused pain. Keyshia Cole turned those private battles into records millions could sing word for word. And that is where the shock lives. Not in a cheap accusation, but in the raw honesty of a woman whose voice made romantic chaos sound beautiful, dangerous, and painfully familiar. Janet Jackson. Janet Jackson built her legend by turning control into art. She was never just Michael Jackson's younger sister. She became a force of her own through Control Rhythm Nation, 1814 Janet, and The Velvet Rope. Her music moved from discipline to desire, from social protest to private confession, and each era revealed a woman pushing against the limits placed on female performers. Janet did not whisper about sensuality. She choreographed it, sang it, and made it part of her power. By the 1990s, her image had shifted from polished pop star to one of R&B's most provocative voices. Songs like "Anytime," "Any Place," "That's the Way Love Goes," and "If" carried intimacy with unusual boldness for mainstream radio. Then The Velvet Rope went deeper, exploring loneliness, fantasy, emotional hunger, and the hidden sides of fame. How many fans danced to those records without realizing Janet was also exposing the pressure of being watched, desired, judged, and misunderstood? The shock around Janet's name should not be reduced to a damaging label about addiction. The stronger truth is that she changed how Black women in pop and R&B could speak about desire without surrendering their dignity. Her sensual image was not careless. It was carefully built, visually precise, and often tied to deeper questions about control, vulnerability, and self-ownership. For older viewers, Janet's career carries a powerful contrast. The soft-spoken woman in interviews became fearless on stage, turning private themes into global performance. Her story holds attention because she made sensuality look glamorous, but underneath it was discipline risk, and the heavy cost of being a woman whose body choices and image were constantly debated by the world. Chaka Khan. When Chaka Khan first stormed stages with Rufus, her voice didn't glide, it surged. Tell me something good. And later, Every woman carried a confidence that felt physical, almost confrontational, as if she were daring the audience to keep up. Fame arrived fast, and with it came a lifestyle that blurred lines between performance and private reality. Backstage circles, industry pressure, and non-stop touring built an environment where intensity wasn't just part of the music, it became part of survival. By the late 70s and into the 80s, Chaka's life offstage grew as turbulent as her vocals were powerful. She later spoke candidly about struggles with substance use, including cocaine and other drugs, acknowledging how deeply they affected her decisions, relationships, and career momentum. Arrests, rehab, and long periods of recovery became chapters she didn't hide from. When an artist lives that close to the edge, are we witnessing rebellion or someone quietly trying to stay standing? The same passion that electrified her performances often spilled into personal choices that tabloids eagerly distorted into something more sensational than truthful. Chaka Khan's connection to this title rests less in fact, and more in how the industry and media framed women who owned their sensuality and independence. Her music celebrated freedom. Songs like Ain't Nobody and I Feel For You carried emotional heat without apology. Yet that freedom was frequently recast into exaggerated narratives about excess and desire. Over time, Chaka reshaped her story through sobriety, resilience, and a voice that never lost its force. What lingers isn't scandal, it's contrast. A woman who sounded unstoppable while navigating battles most listeners never fully saw. Mary J. Blige. When Mary J. Blige arrived in the early 90s, her voice didn't chase perfection, it carried scars. What's the 411 introduced a presence that felt unfiltered, grounded in hip-hop grit, yet drenched in emotional truth. By the time My Life dropped, listeners weren't just hearing songs. They were hearing a woman unravel in real time. Fame didn't soften her edges, it amplified them, placing her in a spotlight where every relationship, every late-night rumor, and every emotional collapse became public currency. Mary's personal life became tightly intertwined with her music, especially during her marriage to Kendu Isaacs, which she later described as controlling and deeply painful. Long before that, she had already been open about struggles with substance abuse, depression, and a constant search for validation in relationships that often drained more than they gave. When love feels like survival instead of peace, how do you tell the difference anymore? That tension between craving connection and losing yourself inside it became a defining thread in how the public interpreted her story, sometimes unfairly, twisting vulnerability into something far more sensational. Mary J. Blige's place within this title reflects how quickly the world labels women who sing openly about desire, heartbreak, and emotional dependency. Songs like Real Love, Be Without You, and Not Gon' Cry didn't hide the mess, they exposed it. But what many framed as excess or instability was in reality documentation of healing in motion. Over decades, she transformed pain into power, earning Grammy's acting acclaim and the title Queen of Hip-Hop Soul. The shock isn't in scandal, it's in endurance. A voice that once sounded like it might break under pressure now carries the weight of survival, still raw, still honest, and impossible to ignore. Diana Ross. Diana Ross did not build her legacy on innocence. She built it on controlled desire. From her time with the Supremes to her solo dominance, her voice carried something more than melody. Songs like Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Touch Me in the Morning, and especially Love Hangover revealed a side of R&B that flirted with obsession, longing, and emotional intoxication. She did not need explicit lyrics. Her tone alone suggested a woman fully aware of attraction power and the pull of romance that refuses to stay balanced. As her career expanded, Diana perfected an image that blurred the line between elegance and temptation. On stage, she moved with precision, wrapped in glamour, yet her performances often carried an undercurrent of emotional urgency. Love Hangover stands as one of the clearest examples, a song that begins in softness before slipping into a rhythm that feels almost addictive, as if desire itself had taken control. How many listeners truly heard the shift in that song and realized it was not just about love, but about losing control inside it? The deeper truth is more unsettling. She helped normalize emotional dependency in a form that looked beautiful. Her music captured the feeling of wanting someone so intensely that logic fades, yet she delivered it with such grace that it felt acceptable, even glamorous. For an audience that has lived through decades of love loss and complicated relationships, that message lands differently. Diana Ross did not present chaos on the surface, she hid it inside elegance. That contrast is where the real impact sits. Her legacy is not built on scandal, but on how convincingly she turned romantic intensity into something millions embraced without ever questioning how close it stood to emotional addiction. Kelis. From the moment Kelis stepped into the spotlight, she carried an energy that refused to be contained. Milkshake wasn't just a hit. It was a cultural moment, a playful, provocative declaration that blurred confidence with curiosity. Her image leaned into bold individuality, bright colors, fearless styling, and lyrics that didn't ask permission. But behind that vibrant surface, the industry began shaping a narrative around her personal life that often drifted far from the music itself. Her marriage to Nas pulled her into a very public, very complicated chapter. What began as a high-profile union later unraveled into a painful divorce, with Kelis speaking years later about emotional turmoil and difficult experiences during that relationship. Instead of listening closely to her words, much of the media focused on speculation, exaggerating her persona into something more provocative than personal. When a woman owns her image so completely, does the world celebrate her or start rewriting her story without her consent? That tension followed Kelis through much of her early career, where perception often overshadowed reality. Kelis connects to this title not through confirmed behavior, but through how boldly she expressed control over her identity and how quickly that boldness was misinterpreted. Songs like Milkshake and Trick Me carried playful sensuality, yet they were frequently reduced into one-dimensional labels that ignored her artistry. Over time, she stepped away from that narrative, reinventing herself beyond music training as a chef, building a life far removed from the spotlight and choosing privacy over noise. What lingers is not scandal, but contrast, a woman once defined by a single provocative image who quietly reshaped her story on her own terms, far beyond what the headlines ever captured. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston did not become unforgettable by singing softly around desire. She made love sound overwhelming, dangerous, sacred, and sometimes impossible to survive. From Saving All My Love for You to I Have Nothing and I Will Always Love You. Her voice carried romance with a force that felt almost physical. Every note rose like a confession too large to keep hidden. She could turn longing into a storm, and millions believed every second of it. Her public life made those songs feel even heavier. Whitney's image began with grace, beauty, church-trained discipline, and a voice the industry treated like a miracle. But behind the perfection, the world slowly saw a woman pulled through pressure, fame, marriage addiction, and emotional chaos. How many fans heard those love songs as pure romance before realizing how much pain could live inside the same voice? That is where her name becomes impossible to ignore in any discussion about R&B women and destructive desire. The stronger, safer truth is that her music and public story revealed how love dependency, fame, and self-destruction can become dangerously tangled. Her relationship with Bobby Brown became one of the most scrutinized celebrity marriages of the 1990s and 2000s, feeding headlines that often turned private suffering into entertainment. For older viewers who remember her rise, the shock is still painful. A woman with one of the greatest voices in history sang about devotion so powerfully. Yet her own life showed how devotion can become damaging when mixed with pressure and instability. Whitney Houston's tragedy is not gossip. It is the haunting contrast between the voice that lifted the world and the woman who struggled beneath its weight. Her songs made love sound eternal, but her life reminded audiences that passion without peace can become a cage. Lil Kim. From the moment Lil Kim stepped into the spotlight beside the notorious Blige, she didn't soften her image to fit expectations. She detonated them. In the mid-90s, her lyrics, fashion, and stage presence challenged every boundary placed on women in hip-hop. Albums like Hardcore turned intimacy into something unapologetic, bold, and impossible to ignore. But that same fearlessness also placed her at the center of a cultural backlash where expression was often twisted into something more extreme than what she actually lived. Her life especially, her complicated relationship with Biggie became part of her public identity. After his death, stories about loyalty, rivalry, and emotional fallout followed her everywhere. Later, legal troubles, including a high-profile perjury conviction in 2005, added another layer to the narrative, keeping her name in headlines for reasons far beyond music. When an artist breaks every rule in public, is the judgment about their choices or about how uncomfortable they make everyone else feel? For Lil Kim, that question lingered as her image was repeatedly framed through controversy rather than context. Her lyrics were explicit, yes, but they were also deliberate, crafted as a form of control in an industry that rarely gave women that power. Tracks like Crush on You and No Time didn't hide desire. They redefined who got to speak about it. Over time, she remained a blueprint for artists who followed even as public perception often reduced her to shock value. What endures is not just the controversy, it's the impact. She didn't just enter the room, she changed what women were allowed to say once they got there. Jody Watley. When Jody Watley stepped out from Shalimar and into her solo era, she didn't just shift lanes, she redrew the map. Looking for a new love and real love introduced a woman who paired sleek, high-fashion visuals with a voice that carried both detachment and desire. Her presence felt controlled, almost untouchable, and that very control made audiences lean in closer. In an industry that often rewarded chaos, Jody built an image on precision, yet the curiosity around her personal life never stayed quiet for long. As her solo career climbed in the late 80s, rumors followed closely behind whispers about relationships, nightlife, and a private world that seemed far more daring than her polished public image suggested. But unlike many of her contemporaries, Jody never fed the narrative. She rarely confirmed, rarely denied choosing, instead to let ambiguity linger. When a woman refuses to explain herself, does the mystery become more powerful or more dangerous in the eyes of the public? That silence created space for speculation, turning her into a figure people tried to decode rather than simply appreciate. Jody Watley's connection to this title sits in that tension between perception and reality. Her music carried sophistication with an undercurrent of sensual independence, and that alone was enough for audiences to project stories onto her. Yet there was never a collapse, never a headline-driven spiral that defined her legacy. Instead, she moved strategically, leaving Shalimar at its peak, winning a Grammy for Best New Artist and maintaining creative control long before it became standard. What remains striking is not scandal, but restraint. In a landscape where many artists were consumed by the narratives built around them, Jody Watley stayed just out of reach, allowing the world to speculate while she quietly kept ownership of her story. Toni Braxton. Toni Braxton didn't need volume to make desire feel overwhelming. Her contralto voice moved low, slow, and deliberate, turning songs like Breathe Again, You Mean the World to Me and Unbreak My Heart into confessions that felt almost too intimate to hear. She rarely rushed emotion, she stretched it, held it, let it ache. That control made her music dangerous in a quiet way. Listeners were not just hearing love, they were sitting inside it. As her career unfolded, Toni's catalog began circling themes that went beyond simple romance. Vulnerability, temptation, regret, and emotional dependency appeared again and again, not as spectacle but as pattern. Her performances often carried a stillness that made every lyric land harder, especially when she explored relationships that refused to resolve cleanly. How many fans replayed "Unbreak My Heart" without noticing how deeply it leans into the idea of not letting go, even when letting go might be the only way forward? The sharper angle is how convincingly she expressed the pull of love that lingers past its breaking point. For an older audience, that feeling is not abstract. It is memory. Her music captures the moments when logic fades, when someone stays longer than they should, when emotion outweighs self-protection. That is where the impact sits. Toni did not dramatize chaos. She slowed it down and gave it a voice. Her songs feel controlled on the surface, but underneath them is a quiet intensity that speaks to attachment, longing, and the difficulty of walking away. She made emotional vulnerability sound elegant, but never simple, and that complexity is what keeps her music resonating long after the final note fades. Tina Turner. Tina Turner never asked permission to take the stage. She seized it with motion sweat and a voice that cut through everything in its path. From Proud Mary to What's Love Got to Do With It, she turned rhythm into impact, building a presence that felt physical as much as musical. Her performances were not soft reflections of love. They were confrontations with it, raw, urgent, and often bruised. Her early life with Ike Turner placed her inside a relationship defined by control and violence, something she later described openly in her autobiography, I, Tina. Those years reshaped how audiences heard her music. Desire, attraction, and attachment no longer sounded romantic. They sounded complicated, even dangerous. When she broke away and rebuilt her career in the 1980s, she carried that history into songs that questioned love itself. How many listeners danced to her hits without realizing they were hearing a woman redefining what love should never look like? The deeper truth is far more powerful. She exposed the cost of staying in a destructive relationship and then proved it was possible to leave and rise again. Her story connects to themes of desire and emotional entanglement, not through excess, but through survival. For an older audience, her journey feels real because it reflects choices people have seen in their own lives: staying too long, enduring too much, then finally walking away. Her legacy does not sit in scandal. It lives in transformation. Tina Turner took pain control and broken trust and turned them into a second life that burned even brighter than the first. Aaliyah. Aaliyah didn't chase attention. She lowered her voice and made people lean in. Her sound moved on quiet confidence, not volume, turning songs like One in a Million, Are You That Somebody, and Try Again into something intimate and controlled. She carried desire without exaggeration, letting space, rhythm, and restraint do the work. On screen in Romeo Must Die, that same calm focus suggested a future that was just beginning to open. By 2001, everything around her felt carefully aligned. The self-titled album showed growth, cooler, more deliberate, more self-possessed, while film roles hinted at a path that could stretch far beyond music. Then came the Bahamas shoot for Rock the Boat, a project built on movement, water, and light. The images captured ease and flow, a sense of someone fully in control of her pace. How many fans watched that video later and realized they were seeing her final moments on camera? After filming wrapped, she boarded a small plane with members of her team to return to the United States. The aircraft crashed shortly after takeoff, ending her life at 22. The shock wasn't just the loss, it was the timing. Nothing in her trajectory suggested an ending. Everything pointed forward. For an audience that grew up with her voice, the silence that followed felt abrupt, almost unfinished. Aaliyah's impact holds because it never feels complete. Her music continues to shape R&B, her image still influences style, and her presence lingers in a way that resists closure. She did not fade out of the spotlight or step away from the stage. Her story stopped mid-motion, leaving behind a question that never settles. What would the next chapter have become if time had allowed it? Behind the hits, desire was exaggerated, distorted, and sold back to the public as controversy. But ask yourself who really benefited from those labels. The artists, or the machine that needed their image to stay provocative. Their music became immortal, yet the rumors refused to die. So what are you really watching, history or a carefully crafted illusion? If you're ready to question everything you've been told, subscribe now to Black Legends Revealed, because the real story is far more unsettling.